Okay, go ahead, sir.
Okay, I need this is the Board of Directors meeting of April 5th. I need a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Kohler,
Here.
Vice President Schmidt,
Here.
and President Russell.
Here. Okay, the next item is, I've been thinking about the issue of the order of our voting. So I've asked them to prepare something for us to discuss about changing the order of voting. So could we, I don't know who's going to discuss that, Ben? Is that Molly or?
I can assist with that if you'd like, President Russell. So the order of roll call vote currently is alphabetical by last name, and that is in accordance with Robert's rules. And there is a reference to our following Robert's rules in the board handbook. But there is nothing that says that the board can't modify the rules as they deem appropriate, as seems appropriate to them. So it is possible to reverse order every other meeting, or to do a kind of a rolling order so that it rotates through every board member, so that it's not always the same order. And I understand there might be some interest in that. And so that's something that the board could adopt tonight. We have agendized it for that purpose.
Any thoughts on it, guys?
I got a couple, not too deep, but I've been going, I think first for about 8 years, so I wouldn't mind switching it up. And I think, I really haven't had a chance to look at Robert's rules. I mean, I'm not questioning Molly's opinion about it, but so it really is up to you guys. I mean, it doesn't really bother me. It's on some critical votes. It can be somewhat stressful, but I mean, that's just the way it is. And I really would want to get a consensus from the rest of the board if there's a desire to change it.
Well, since it's my idea, I think I think it's unfair to have to be in the same voting order. And I think switching it on a meeting by meeting basis is pretty easy. Molly's idea about rolling it, that's an interesting idea too.
Yeah.
Whatever we do, including nothing, I think it needs to be easy for Terry to keep track of, because that seems to be the tricky part. Obviously, we have no individual board member would have control of the order, so you couldn't pick and choose the meeting. You couldn't avoid certain things, but I just think I think it's only fair that we consider rotating.
Is it fair? Are you driving to that it's unfair to the person that comes up first, or people at the beginning?
I am.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, I don't mean just to kick the can down the road, but I really would like to give it some further thought. I mean, I'm not, adverse to changing it up. So just.
What if we just try it
Yeah, I mean.
and see how it goes?
Why not? So, I mean, we could go reverse alphabetical order every other meeting or something like that, just to see how.
That's
it
exactly.
goes.
Yeah, something that's really simple for Terry.
So.
The other thing I was thinking of is for purposes of kind of keeping track and making sure everybody's kind of on notice as to what the order would be. If you note at the bottom of the agenda, we do have all of the directors' names listed, and we could, Terry could modify that by meeting, every other meeting, to reflect the current order for that meeting, so that it would be that would help her keep track of it and help all of you understand also what that looks like.
That's an excellent idea.
So is the proposal that we would have a rolling, rotating order that like keep the same alphabetical order, but rotate the order? Is that what we're talking about? Or does it mix up every time?
No, it doesn't.
I'm-
The idea, Monty, was to switch front to back, not a rolling order. That's an option. But the idea would be to just reverse it.
But then you just put the person who's at the end in the same. You just have two people who are leading if the issue is out of sort of a fairness of that there's different that each member is first in voting on at different times, then you should do a rolling, rotating order so that everybody has the same opportunity.
That's fair. I don't care one way or the other. I just think it's unfair to have to burden the person who just by alphabetical reasons has the name that's called first.
So I think Director Bragman, you're in that seat. So if it's, if this is something that you'd like, if we're trying to solve a problem that is a concern for you, then let's definitely give it a shot. But if it's not a concern to you, then is it something that we need to, is there a problem to solve?
It's not really a concern for me, but I know it's a concern for President Russell, and I really want to defer to him. I mean, I think it's a relatively minor change that might be interesting, and I'm willing to give it a shot, but honestly, the order of voting, it's just not, it's not a grievance of mine. I do think it's an interesting concept just from sort of a parliamentary point of view of just changing it up a little bit. And, so I support the concept just on the basis that it would provide some regularity or a little more maybe fairness in the order in which we vote. So I don't have anything profound to say about it, really.
Monty's idea has some good thought behind it. Why don't we try this? Why don't we do the rotation as proposed and give it a try, and then let's talk after we've done the first rotation and see if it's better or no different, or
Sure.
everybody same.
We would want a motion and a vote from the board because it is a adopted position that we'd want to change formally. So I'm hearing an interest potentially in trying the rolling order for one rotation and then check back.
I'll move approval for that.
Second.
Is it, guys, is this an agendized motion? I mean, I don't think this is an agendized.
We did,
Item.
Director Kohler put
Oh,
it
okay.
under adoption of the agenda, consider. change
Oh, it's
order
part of the
roll call.
agenda. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, we did add it so that it could be acted on if there was an interest.
Okay, no problem. I'm good.
No, it's a good question.
As long as we're talking about, Robert's Rules of Order.
So let's get the trickiest question out of the way first, Molly. What order do we use to vote on it?
I suggest that we would keep the order the same as per usual tonight, and that we would start the rotation at the next meeting. So Terry has a chance to then change the list at the bottom, and we'll just run one rotation. You'll see it on the committee special board meetings, and then the regular board meetings. It'll just run through, and then we'll put it back on the agenda for further consideration by the board, if that works.
And I guess one other thing we should add to it, Molly and I have been discussing this, and she informed me that, and you're going to laugh at this, I'm sure, that the president always votes last. So it doesn't affect the decision.
That is true.
Yeah.
Okay. Will the just to be clear too, the order will be listed on the agenda for every board meeting so that we know, we know as the evening starts or whenever our meeting is?
Yeah, I suppose a point of clarification is, do we want to do this for the committee special board meetings or just the regular board meetings, just to make it more complicated for us tonight?
Ooh, could we just try the board meetings first?
Yes.
If it
Thank
works and it's not too big of a deal, then we can opt to do it for all the other things. But that sounds like a lot of work for. But anyway, that would be my suggestion about that.
Thanks.
Does that need to be added to the motion, Molly, or we go as is? and
Whoever
we'll-
first and seconded the motion, if they're amenable to that friendly amendment. that would work.
That's a friendly amendment, I think. So,
Mhm.
Jack, don't you think so? That's
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay, then let's have a roll call in alphabetical order.
Director Bragman,
aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
President Russell.
Aye. Okay. Oh,
Are we going to adopt the agenda too?
But we still need to do that adoption of the agenda.
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Second,
roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye. Now we'd like to get a comment on items not on the agenda.
Yes, there are 2 public comments. I'm going to share my screen to put up the timer. And then let me find my, oops. Oh, yeah.
Terry, thank you so much for doing this. If there's an easier way to keep track of this, let's make it easy as can be, because jumping back and forth between PowerPoint slides might be kind of challenging. But please let us know if there's, whatever we can make to make it easy.
Patience probably right now. I have 2 speakers, Mr. Roger Roberts and then Mr. Larry Minikes. Mr. Roberts, I'm going to enable your microphone permissions. Please unmute yourself and I will start the timer once I hear you.
Good evening.
Hi, Roger.
I'm just asking a question. When will be the next workshop on the work being done by Jacobs Engineering? And if there is another workshop at that point in time, will they give a summary of what they've accomplished to date at that meeting? So it's really a 2-part question, and I would hope that I could get an answer.
Okay, we only allow 1-part questions, Roger.
President Russell, I can go ahead and answer if you'd like.
Yes, sir.
We have a special board meeting this month on the 26th at 5 p.m. where we'll be bringing to the board and obviously the public an update on the project. We will have certainly more public workshops, but those have not yet been scheduled.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Next speaker is Mr. Larry Minikes. Mr. Minikes, I've enabled you to speak, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. I actually wanted to speak to the last item and no one asked for public comment. I was terribly hurt. I
got so involved, Larry, in the subject that I apologize for that. I thought about it after I said it, but I was thinking, oh, well.
Apology accepted, but don't let it happen again.
Yeah.
In any case, Larry, I agree. Larry Russell, I agree with you. Larry Bragman, I agreed with you. Monty, I agree with you with the rotation. From the public standpoint, it makes sense. It seems fair. And I don't see, I was thinking, is there any negative impact to the public? There is no negative impact to the public. And that's all I wanted to really weigh in on that. The other item is, some of you may have seen the editorial from the IJ today, pretty much lambasting Governor Newsom for not doing anything in terms of water supply, cutting water supply, or asking for reductions in water supply. And I hope, and I think you should be looking at summer allotments and whether it is appropriate any longer to continue this discounting program. It does feel like it's time for that to end. It doesn't make sense any longer in the climate we're in, particularly because really we missed the bullet. You know, we had that rain, otherwise driest 3-4 months on record. I mean, it's really frightening. It's really frightening when we think about it. So this is not about fear. This is about doing what is really the right thing to do at this time. And so thank you. And the last comment is San Rafael has seemed to get their clock act down. They have one little window like all of you folks, and it seems to be flawless and work really well. So I suggest taking a look at it. Thank you so much. And that's my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hope we did dodge the bullet and it's not just deja vu all over again coming this year. So, okay. Thank you, Larry. Directors and general managers announcements. I think you're up, Ben, with that one. We can pick the directors up after that.
Okay, I do have a brief item I wanted to share with the board. When we moved the start of board meetings from 7:30 to 7, the board decided to do it on a kind of a trial or a pilot with a 6-month check-in. And we are now at the 6th month check-in. So I wanted to get a sense from the board. Is it working or not? If not, we would want to agendize it at an upcoming meeting for discussion.
Well, I'll go if no one else is ready. Or you want to go, Larry? Go ahead.
I mean, it's fine with me. My question would be really what the other board members feel, and also to get a little feedback from the public this time, whether it's public comment or just giving us a chance to kind of query our residents about it. But I think 7's a good time. That's when Fairfax starts its meetings. It seems to be after the dinner hour, give people enough time to get home and kind of settle in. So I think it's a pretty good time.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely worked better for me. It does, sometimes these meetings go long and just having that little extra time is helpful. So I vote yes. But I agree. I want to hear from the public about it as well.
Yeah,
Same.
I find it jams my schedule. Today, for instance, I was in Los Angeles and I had to take an earlier flight than I would have taken to get back for the meeting. So at 7:30, I prefer that personally.
Mhm. I think I do too, although I'm quite frankly not dug in on it, but I find it a little bit more convenient to be ready for it, quite frankly. Mhm.
I guess
Monty,
I
you were
would-
going to say something?
Monty, you're the tiebreaker.
Yeah, I'm the tiebreaker. It's kind of like going first almost. I kind of feel like the 7, honestly, it works better for me. The other meetings sometimes go really late. And I think that is, I think it's challenging for people in general, but also we all get kind of tired. We're older. I don't know. I'll just blame myself, but when we start getting into those 9:30, 10:30 nights, they get long. So starting earlier seems, I think works better for me, but.
Well, that was actually my thinking. I'm the one pushing on Ben about this. And my thinking was that we did it for a reason, which was exactly the reason you described, Monty. But I don't think we're in that situation right now. We also had the gun to our head to make a series of very critical decisions, like the buying the pipe, hiring the consultants. So there were some fairly long meetings, and I think those are, at least for the moment, past us.
Well, when we go to in-person meetings, it really means effectively, because you got to factor in travel time, you got to be on your way to the district by 6:30. So, that jams you dinner hour, et cetera. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't have made it today if we had that constraint check.
Well, I think
As
we're
an
going to be in
example.
this hybrid space for a while, and I have a feeling we do have some pretty significant issues coming up, honestly, guys. I mean, I think there's a lot ahead of us.
Well, but like the biggest thing ahead of us, Cynthia, is that issue of the discussion with Jacobs, which starts at 5. So,
It's,
Why don't we take some public comment and see what other folks have to say, and we can maybe come back to it. I'd like to hear. I think we all would like to hear how it is for other folks to attend.
that's cool. We need to agendize it to do that.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
sorry.
we'll go ahead based on the comments and agendize this for an upcoming meeting, if that works for the board.
Okay, that's
Sure.
cool. Okay, any other things, Ben?
No, that was it.
Larry?
I do, if the board wants committee reports, I do have some notes that Terry actually gave me from the Watershed Committee. So
Have at it.
yeah, it's very quick. We met on March 17th. It was the first meeting of the year. We got an update on the Azalea Hill project, got a great PowerPoint with some really good photos of some of the projects and the bridges that are being built with volunteer work that are associated with that project. We reviewed and referred to tonight's meeting, the letter of support for the beaver reintroduction study to Lagunitas Creek. Local ranchers that would be involved have indicated that they support the concept, support the study. We also had an amendment to the existing agreement with Environmental Science Associates for the Lagunitas Creek restoration design work. Again, that's on our agenda. That's actually on the consent agenda. That was, we received a very generous grant through the hard work of our staff, $857,000 to complete and get up to 100% design habitat restoration downstream from Peters Dam. And then we did get an update on the Watershed Recreation Management Plan. So that's getting quite a bit of interest from the community. I understand there have been some public meetings that are underway. I've got a meeting with one of the stakeholder groups this week. So, we expect to have a large community engagement component, which I'm sure nobody is surprised about. And so it's underway, and we're moving on that as well. So that's my report from Watershed.
Okay. I just want to remind everybody that Friday is our biennial North Bay Watershed Association conference that we have. And Terry has sent out to each of the board members the agenda and so forth. So, be there or be square.
That's Friday.
Friday,
Yes.
this Friday, the 8th.
What time?
Starts at 9:30, goes to 3.
Whoa, okay. Okay, thanks.
It has breaks in between, throughout the day.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Cynthia?
Nothing for me.
Monty?
Nothing for me.
And nothing for me. Okay, with that, we need to move on to the consent calendar. I need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Roll call.
Director,
I wanted to ask if we had any public comment. I didn't want to miss any this time
Okay,
for the approval of the consent calendar.
yes, there are 2. Okay. All right, pull it up. And as I pull it up, please be ready to make sure your hands are raised. And our first speaker will be last 4 digits, 1402. I've enabled you to speak. Go ahead.
James Holmes, Larkspur. A quick question respecting consent calendar item number 3, beaver reintroduction in Lagunitas Creek. A question and then maybe a comment. Did the staff, in preparing its recommendation, consider the cautionary letter in Saturday's April 2nd IJ, which references the problems that the Forest Service is having with beavers up in Lake Tahoe area? I wonder if that letter was considered, because I read the initial article. I'm sorry?
I think that's your feedback.
Oh, I was one of those who read the initial article in the IJ, and it seemed like a good idea. But then when I read the cautionary letter, specifically suggesting consultation with the Forest Service, it seemed to me a good idea for the staff to consider. And so I wondered if the staff did consider that letter and did contact the Forest Service with regard to the problems that they are having up in Lake Tahoe regarding beaver reintroduction before taking a position on this issue by the board.
Could I comment on that?
So why not?
My understanding is that we are not the lead agency on the study. The lead agency is going to be the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. What the letter does is it indicates that we're willing to cooperate with the study and, assist by cooperating by providing data, information, and that type of thing. So CDFW, I'm sure, will be in contact with a sister agency in the state government to get as much information as they can about the study to reintroduce beaver. So our letter really is an indication of our willingness to cooperate with the study to allow it to go forward. It's not a decision that locks us into reintroducing beaver in Lagunitas Creek watershed.
It seemed to be a recommendation, or it seemed to be an approval, or to urge the state to approve it. But if I misread it, then I apologize for that.
Well,
I certainly think it makes sense to cooperate, but an affirmative recommendation might be premature at this point.
Well, what the letter says is that we support CDFW's continued analysis of reintroduction. So we have to wait and get the data before we make any decision. And that's what the study's going to do, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Minikis. Where did I put Mr. Minikis at? Okay, Mr. Minikis, go ahead. You're enabled permissions to speak now. Go ahead.
Good evening again. And, there was a lengthy study done. I was conferring with Ann Thomas earlier, and there's a lengthy study done in 2014 on beavers. And I've been fortunate enough to see several presentations these past at least few months on reintroduction. It's very interesting. Ann wrote one sentence here that completely encapsulates my thinking as well, which is, if this proceeds, she wrote, if MMWD proceeds, I hope that it includes a strong commitment that the watershed and fisheries staff will very, very carefully monitor the situation and reverse course if it looks like it's not working as hoped for. And I think it's an experiment. I think it's a worthwhile. I'm speaking for myself because we have not had time as a group to really discuss this, that it's worthwhile. If it can help improve fisheries and do what is claimed to do, it's worth seeing, but also it really is, I believe, sort of an experiment to see if we can do this successfully. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay. With that, let's have a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, now we need to move on to the regular agenda. Item number 7, amendment number 2 to professional services agreement.
Good evening, directors. I'm Alex Nye, engineering manager of the design section. This evening, Zach Talbot will be presenting the second amendment. to-
All right, can I interrupt? It's super hard to hear you, Alex. We're getting like a huge amount of feedback.
It's like you're underwater.
Yeah.
My video, maybe
Yeah, maybe
it's
try.
not working better.
It's a little better.
Oh,
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Sorry
Now
about
it's
that.
back. Now it's bad again. Why don't you reconnect? Why don't you drop off and reconnect?
Okay, is that better?
Much
Loud
better.
and clear.
Okay. All right, so good evening. I'm Alex Nayad, engineering manager of the design section. This evening, Zach Talbot will be presenting the second amendment to the professional services agreement with Stanton Engineering for the continued engineering support services of the San Geronimo Water Treatment Plant generator project. Zach, you have the floor.
Mhm.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, hi, my name is Zach Talbot. I'm an associate engineer in the engineering design group. I'm here to present amendment number 2 to professional services agreement MA 5898 with Stanton Engineering. This amendment is for the continued construction engineering services in support of the San Geronimo Water Treatment Plant emergency generator project. Amendment number 2 will allow Stanton Engineering to continue to provide construction engineering support services and extend their contract completion date to September 30th, 2022. District staff requests the board authorize the general manager to execute amendment number 2 to professional service agreement 5898 with Stanton Engineering for their engineering services in support of the construction phase for the San Geronimo treatment plant emergency generator project in the amount of $36,000, which will bring the new total not to exceed amount to $131,600. Thank you.
I have one comment. How's the project going?
The project's going well. We are expecting the generators to be on site within 2 weeks, and we're expecting construction to be buttoning up right around June 30th with minor things like programming of the automatic transfer switch occurring sometime in July.
Cool.
Yeah, and I was out there on another project, and I thought it looked good. The foundation was in. It's sort of positioned away from San Geronimo Road, which I was happy about. It's at some distance from the residential area, which I thought was good planning, good positioning. Foundation looks very beefy, but if all goes as expected, Alex or Zach, how tall is the project going to be?
The generators themselves?
Yeah, is it
roughly 10 feet tall?
Yeah, so it's kind of tucked away nicely is my point. So I'll try to check it out in the next few months and see how it's going. But I was definitely sort of relieved that it was tucked away in that corner. So
you think that bright red color is going to be okay for it then?
I think we should have a board retreat and actually paint it.
We'll put our handprints on it. That's a good idea.
Yeah, something like that. But no, it's in a good location. So we'll see if the air quality board approves it, but you know, it looks good to me.
Thank you. And they have approved of the authority to construct. So they've reviewed the plans and given the project to go ahead to construct.
And presumably less exhaust or controlled exhaust. So, you know, that's a good thing
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, these newer Generac engines are actually more fuel efficient and produce less carbon dioxide. So, you know, yeah, it's actually a better system.
All good. Okay. No, it's
There's
good
still
to
a 30-foot exhaust pipe or something, right?
No,
No?
no.
Where is it now?
It's still, the stack comes out, so it's probably another 4 to 5 feet above the top of the generator themselves.
Oh, so 15 or something then, huh?
Yeah, call it 15 feet, you're good.
Cool. Any other comments? Can I get a motion to approve? Well, let's get public comment.
There are no hands raised.
I'd move.
I need a motion to,
I'll
thank
move
you.
approval.
Second,
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
item 8, water supply update.
Good evening, members of the board, members of the public. Paul Sellier, Operations Director, Water Resources Director. Old habits die hard. I think somebody said this evening it was a light agenda, but you know, you have to watch out for light agendas. Sometimes they can be sneaky. So tonight's water supply update may be one of those. We're going to do our traditional water supply update, and we've sort of snuck in there a quick peek at how we're doing in terms of our operations plan for the water year. And then we're going to move into a discussion of the water supply assessment. Because there's a lot of interest in this project, as we've already heard from members of the public this evening. And that will, you know, hopefully tee up some nice discussion on some reasonably complicated topics that, again, the questions appear simple, but I think the answers are somewhat complex. So jumping right ahead then, our cumulative precipitation, we're very much right on the average for the year, which is, you know, remarkable for 2 reasons. One, of course, all of the rain occurred 3 months ago. And the last 3 months, actually not the driest on record for us, but pretty close. I think 2013 was drier. But this is up there in terms of a dry period for us. Nevertheless, cumulative precipitation right on the average. So kind of a tale of 2 years as far as the water year goes. Our reservoir storage is also similarly tracking our average storage. We're actually marginally better off than we were in 2019-20, this yellow line up here. And of course, markedly better than we were this same time last year. So overall, it's a relatively good position that we find ourselves in heading into the summer period. In terms of projections, we are still looking at hitting right around the average at the end of the water year, which is on the September vertical here. This represents October 1st, and you can see the gray dashed line, which would represent our storage levels in the reservoirs were we to get no rain. So very close to average, even with no rain. I would note that even if we had average rain, it changes our position, but not as dramatically as it would have, back in the rainy weather. We don't typically see much rain over this period. So it's, even if we got average, it wouldn't really affect our storage levels too much. I do want to just mention the trigger levels that we see here. These are our older trigger levels. We do have new trigger levels that we've developed, and we're in the process of refining those before bringing them to the board for some discussion. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be teeing those up. Taking a quick look at our operations plan that we started for the year, I'll just walk through some of the data here. So the plan is based off of an anticipated demand somewhere in the neighborhood of 26,000 acre feet. And we were going to achieve that by supplying 12,900 from the reservoir system, purchasing 9,000 acre feet of supplemental water, and estimating a conservation at the state mandated 15%. To date, so far, we've used about 32% of total. For the period October 1 through April 1, we would expect to use about 10,700 acre feet during a normal year. And you can see we've used just about 20% less than that. So you can see down in this lower box for the year since October 1, we're right on that 20% savings. The rest of these numbers on the percentages here, we use about 40% of our total water supply between October 1 and April 1. So you would expect our total water use to be around 40%, and most of the rest of these would track linearly as well. So you can see we're actually doing well. We're using slightly less reservoir water, and we're bringing in slightly more supplemental water. And of course, overall, our conservation is beating our estimates, which is what we want to see. Just a quick note on the conservation, you can see the sort of monthly conservation numbers down right at the bottom here, October and November, and it's sort of a diminishing returns at this point. So we'll be interested in keeping an eye keenly on how that's moving.
Paul, can I ask you, this is super helpful. I just want to thank you for organizing this way. It's really clear. So 20% conservation, can you just verify that's from each of these numbers, October, November through March? That's from what baseline for each?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our baseline that we're using, including this 25,800, is our MMWD standard, which is the 3-year average from 2018. So that's a little more stringent than if we were to use just 2020, because as we know, 2020 demand was quite a bit higher. What we would see if we used a 2020 benchmark, this conservation level would be a 24% number. So we're doing 24% better than we did in 2020. But compared to our benchmark, which is the 3-year average, we're at 20%. And the same for these numbers would be slightly higher compared to 2020.
Thanks, that's helpful. The 20, just to round up, the 26,000 acre foot demand. So that's the 3-year average. I'm a little surprised because haven't we been lower than that in, if we were to take a 5-year or 7-year average, it just seems a little, not dramatically high, but I thought our average was actually somewhat lower. Is that, I'm just interested in your thought about how real that number is, because it seems a little high, just based on the last, 14 years or so that I've been following it closely.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you remember and you think back to some of the early water supply reports, and we used to have a 12-month running average chart that would show roughly represent. And if you remember, it had, for the last couple of years, it had started creeping up. And we were in 2020, we were watching it pretty closely, wondering when it was going to turn. So I think this is as fair an estimate as we can come up with at the moment as a 3-year average, but we can certainly look into extending that if you'd like to
I was just
5-year.
curious about your sense of it. It just seemed high, based, like I say, based on the last 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we didn't use 2020.
Yeah.
We felt that was, obviously an anomaly.
Okay. And then, and not to belabor it, but my recollection, and you can spell me on this, is that the estimate, way back when, was that we'd get to 2020 and the demand would be 36,000.
Oh yeah.
Does that sound about right?
I think that's pretty close. I remember we had a deficit actually, I think.
Right. That's what was part of the reason I'm interested in this conversation is because the forecast at that time for 36,000 was that there was going to be a 10,000 acre foot deficit, and that was sort of driving a lot of the analysis at the time. So I think it's important to note that kind of that kind of forecast really can drive decisions in a way that may not be in the best interest of the district, because just based on the efficacy of those assumptions.
Yes, and I think if we drill down into those assumptions, you'd be right.
Okay.
'Cause that is what happened.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So our operations plan, we're doing pretty well, is the overall message from the operations plan. It's tracking fairly well. It's not the only thing that we're doing right. The engineering team has completed the phase 1 of the Castania pump station. This really is a significant water supply enhancement for us, and it's going to bring in around 5,000 more acre feet than we currently could get under the old gravity system. And with future improvements, we can move that up to the full 14.3 from Sonoma. If we think about this in terms of reservoir storage, it's greater than a reservoir the size of Bontempi. The capital cost I'm showing here includes phase 2, which is some additional resiliency work. And of course, the water that we get through Castania isn't free, and we're currently scheduled to paying about $1,257 an acre foot. But it is nice to have that additional resiliency.
Also, Paul, I think we should indicate that it's approximately equal to the flow that would have resulted from the desal plant that was planned in 2010.
Yeah, it's another equivalency. That's a good one. So of course, we're not stopping and resting on our laurels with Castania. Of course, the board knows that we're looking into Phoenix Lake operations, how to improve that and to try to help with both flood control and water supply. And the engineering team is looking at that, as well as, of course, I mentioned this phase 2, which is going to add some resiliency to the Castania pump station by upgrading the electronics there. And of course, as we pivot now to the water supply assessment, that's also part of our strategy as we move forward. And the assessment is really geared toward, asking these key questions, and the process of the assessment is what's going to, I hope, guide us to understanding what the range of answers could be for some of these. So these key questions, what kind of risk is there to our water system at the moment? How reliably can we deliver water under, past and future droughts? And what extra volume would we need in order to do that? And what are the different hydrologies under which we'd be doing that? And importantly, as Director Kohler was heading to a few minutes ago, what are the demand scenarios? What is the right demand scenario, and how should we be thinking about demand reduction? And we're going to get into a little bit of that. Hopefully, it's just a conversation in a few minutes. So, the range of water supply alternatives, what could we do in order to increase our resiliency? And then, of course, in the short term, before we start, constructing things, how do we think about the short term in terms of drought resiliency? So these are just 4 of the key questions that we'll be looking into as part of the assessment.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
Yep.
I'm a little surprised because I know we talked about this last time. I would have expected for you to include cost in this at some point, because if costs are not a factor, then you can do anything, right? So I'm a little surprised to not see that again.
Yeah, I think cost is just going to be such an inherent part of this. But these are really, at the moment, it's not that we're discounting cost. We know that that's a very important factor for us.
Okay.
But we're just looking at what the realm of possibilities would be for solutions, and trying to kind of consider all possibilities. And clearly there are going to be some that are going to fall out once we analyze and take a look at the cost aspects of them. They just be beyond our reach, and beyond practical aspects.
I think when we're talking about some of these projects, for example, Costanza, we just went through a little bit of a discussion of Costanza, and as I recall, the cost of that was something like $254 an acre foot or something. I mean, it was dramatically low compared to some of our other water sources. Am I remembering that correctly?
The added cost for Castania phase 1, I think, was about $1.6 million.
But
don't recall seeing a per acre foot cost for that that improvement, but it would obviously depend on how much water we move through that facility.
Right, but what I remember is a relatively low
Oh,
cost
yeah.
per acre foot. And what I'm saying here is that when we talk about that, we should also say at this cost. So we link the two together. As Cynthia says, that's obviously an important connection.
I think that's right. And let's just to clarify, these are just some of the key questions that we're sort of addressing in a philosophical sense. But as we move on in a little bit and we show sort of the concepts that we have developed around goals, you'll note that one of the goals obviously relates directly to financials. And I think it's obviously clear we have to have cost metrics in order to evaluate projects. I think we understand that.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be different depending on what the project is and what the volume of water is.
Yeah, and I don't mean to keep interrupting you and harping on this. The reason I think when you present to the public, when we as a district present to the public about key questions, I do think it is important to indicate that we understand a key question is cost and not that it's a secondary question. I just think that's really my reason for raising it, because I think this is the second time we've seen, here are the key questions. So I'm just asking you to bear that in mind as we're talking to the public about this.
I hear you. I think I understand you. And I would say it's going to be a factor in the evaluation process.
I did a rough calc, Paul, based on the 1.6 million and the 5,000 acre feet per year if we take the whole allotment. And that number, Jack, comes to $320 an acre foot on a 1 year basis.
Yeah, that's a 1 year basis. It would be quite a bit less over, 20 years.
Yeah.
But
you're in the ballpark, Jack.
Yeah, it was a little low. I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in support of these, getting to the root of these questions, the project has sort of 6 key scope elements. And as we look at them here, the strategy and goals being the first bullet, but really all of these first 3 are kind of being developed in parallel, and they're geared toward understanding the risk and establishing the goals. So if we think of strategy and goals in a way, it's establishing a level of service. And this decision support model, it's really a decision support tool. If you think of it almost like a spreadsheet that we can use once it's been developed to change the inputs. So if we needed to think about a different level of demand management, we could do that. If we needed to think about a different water supply option, as an example, we could do that. And you can run those different alternatives through this tool, and it will, the outputs are things like our reservoir levels, right, to help us understand. And then the other third part here, and these 3 really will be in depth on April 26th. And I know the board wanted to have that meeting earlier, but scheduling and challenges notwithstanding. And we do have some thoughts about proposing, a way to increase the number of meetings to have that frequency of discussion kind of enhanced a little bit. So that third bullet around water supply and demand scenarios, really, how long of a drought should we be thinking about, and how are we going to quantify supply and demand? It culminates in the roadmap. So again, these are just completely for your consideration, and they're somewhat, I don't think these are surprising to find these sort of draft goals around water supply, water quality, sustainability, and environmental, and as I mentioned, the economic and financial. But these are, as I say, traditional, but they're very much for your consideration. And they're, if you like, the high level guiding principle type goals, but not to shy away from, and we'll take a look in a minute in some little bit of detail at the first water supply goal. But But these guiding principles can and do lead to some very key assumptions. And this is where it'll be important for us to understand the board's thoughts and concerns over those particular types of data. And so as we, again, April 26th sounds like D-Day at this point, but it is going to be a really good, interesting meeting. And we're calling it a working session for that reason. It's really going to be, it should be really informative. So anyway, the team wanted to look to show you the water supply goal. Obviously, it's fairly key to what we're doing. And it's sort of a preview into what we consider sort of the anatomy, if you like, of a goal. So we have our guiding principle up top that we'd like to provide a reliable and resilient water supply now and for the future. And then each goal will be supported by actions. And again, everywhere you see, goal or action, I'd encourage you to think of these as draft and just for consideration. And we're interested in your thoughts and feedback, either tonight or April 26th or any time in between, quite honestly. So in terms of the actions, they're there to support the goals. So if we follow through with these actions, the natural outcome is the goal. And we need a way to measure the actions in terms of how effective are we in that. And that's where the metrics come in. So by definition, metrics, of course, are measurable. And you'll see I've sort of used some chevrons here, as you might have seen in the old days in a form letter. Right? Is 4 years the right number? 20% rationing, does that feel right? Is that going to, and these are numbers that we don't just want to pull out of the air. They're numbers that the consultant Jacobs is working on to help define. And the drought number, for example, will be using both historic data, paleo data, and then predictive software looking forward to understand what sort of pattern of hydrology we can expect and how many of those years out of a certain quantity are going to be both warm and dry. And then again, even in terms of local storage, what sort of number do we all feel comfortable with at the end of this 4-year drought, as we were showing in the kind of placeholder here? Would we, I know last September we were all at 27,000 acre feet, and like a cat on a hot tin roof. I don't think anybody was comfortable. So is 25,000 the right number? But again, we don't want to just pull a number and just because it feels right. We want to have support for that number. So, if 4,000 is acre feet is dead storage, maybe another 6 is a water quality uncertainty because we don't know how the water is going to be at that low when the reservoir system is that low. And then you need 6 months of demand on top of that, would seem to be prudent to me. But even that 6 months is questionable, right? And we need to look at that and go, does that really make sense for us? Can we do something in that period of time that will help us extend our water supply? So maybe it's more than 6 months. Anyway, you get the idea. And then similarly, and I don't want to keep harping on data, but again, with water use targets, we would want to understand if we selected a target, what would that mean? What would that program look like? What would it cost? What does it cost for us to think about storage at 25,000 acre feet? What are the cost implications of choosing a 4-year drought versus a 5-year drought, right? So there are these trade-offs that we're going to want to just look at and go, oh, well, it's sort of, the larger one is only 2% more. We should do the larger project or something of that nature. But so it's not that we don't want to consider cost and that it's a key factor. It's sort of, we just need to understand the relative nature of these things. And so data is really going to help support your decisions through that process. And that's what the team is really trying to drive toward, is to bring that data. And so that's what we're hoping to bring and present on the 26th.
Mhm.
So this then, again, this is very much the preview tonight, not the movie. So it's the trailer, but with that kind of analysis, there is still room for us to have really, I think, interesting conversations around some kind of almost philosophical policy level questions that I'm going to sort of tee up next. And the first slide is sort of the summary of the 3 questions. And this is just 3 that we've thought of. I'm sure you may have more. And then the following 3 slides will kind of help us walk through it and navigate. So the first one we wanted to kick off was, how should we think about long-term conservation projections in the context of water supply planning? And we'll get into what we mean and what sort of the bookends might look like for that, just to kind of frame a table. And then how do we, and President Russell, excuse me, has asked this question for a long time, which is, how do we make these decisions in the face of uncertainty? Climate change seems to be changing the book on us. So what do we do? How do we look back and use that information to predict what's going to happen in the future? And then just this third one, given the likely timing for any supply enhancement, should we decide that we need an enhancement project, it's going to take a certain amount of planning and time to construct and deliver in a thoughtful way. So how do we manage any potential, droughts and shortages in the short term? And we need a game plan for these. So these are 3. So let's jump to the next slide, and then I'm going to stop talking after a little bit and let you guys have your discussion. So on this first one, how should we think about long-term? And I would just say that these are not intended as answers. These are just, I would say these are conversation starters. But anyway, how should we think about long-term conservation projections in the context of water supply planning? And should we, consider as a margin of safety? And what the heck do you mean by that, right? So I think what we mean by that is this notion of belt and suspenders. And let's just think about that for a minute. That's a kind of an old statement. I don't know if all of our listeners are hip to belt and suspenders, right? But the belt holds up your trousers and the suspenders perform the same function. So as a classic engineer, I would say they are, redundant systems, right? They afford a mutual backup should one of them fail, right? So what we mean is that we would pursue a conservation or demand management strategy in parallel with a water supply strategy. And should either of those fail, we have a backup. Or maybe if one of them proves, stunningly successful, then, that one keeps moving forward at a faster rate. So that's one maybe bookend that we could think about. The other is here in the middle, right? Use conservation to account for growth. What I mean by that is, when we're talking about this in the context of sort of holding demand constant. So in 10 years, there's going to be theoretically a certain amount of growth within the service area. And this is up for debate how much that's going to be. But would we allocate conservation to deal with growth and just sort of pursue it in that way? And then the third concept, again, this is not comprehensive, is we would say, no, we have great confidence in our ability to achieve conservation, and we're going to run the numbers and use data and come up with a targeted conservation amount. And whatever water supply deficit we have, we're going to reduce that deficit by the targeted conservation amount. So kind of different ways, maybe 3 different ways to think about demand management. So I'll just pause there and take any comments or thoughts.
So I have a few. This is really helpful, Paul. I just want to start by complimenting you on the way that you've framed this. I think this is super helpful for the board, and I think it's what we need to be thinking about. I just did a little teeny back of the envelope math, and I'm sure you or perhaps Director Russell could let me know if I'm wrong, but the 26,000 acre foot demand that you're thinking about right now, that 3-year average that we discussed earlier, if I've got my my conversion to acre feet and gallons correctly, I think that looks like it translates to me to about 120 gallons of water per person per day. So for me, the question is, and I'm hoping, this is something the board will be interested in engaging in, is, and I think these three scenarios that you've laid out, those are reasonable, that represents a reasonable range to be thinking about in terms of, where you're, where you want to go in terms of demand. And I think all of the belt and suspender stuff, I think that's right. I don't think you pick a number and say, oh, that's the demand we want to meet. Now let's go meet it. I think for what you're doing here, what we're all doing here together, you want to pick that level of demand, or range, I should say, of demand, and then say, and now what do we do to be, to meet that on average? And then what do we need to do on top of that when we're dealing with a drought? Does that seem like a fair way to describe what you're describing?
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems that where the board where I think it would be helpful for the board to weigh in is, do we simply want to say, yep, we're going to be 120 gallon of water per person per day district. That's just who we are. Or do we want to build into our water supply assessment? Maybe we want to be somewhat more sustainable and resilient in light of climate change. So do we want to build in, and I don't want to think about this in terms of, I know, to me, it's not so much about conservation. It's a matter of, are we using water wastefully? It should be, the dynamic, as far as I'm concerned, is less using less and more wasting. It's more about wasting less, right? And do we need to be 120 gallons of water per person per day? Is that really our base? Is that an appropriate base? Should we be looking should we be using this water supply assessment as an opportunity to be thinking a little more innovatively and a little more ambitiously, right? What does our water supply assessment look like if we want to be somewhere between, say, 65 and 95 GPCD? There's what it costs to get there relative to the cost of not getting there. And then there's the cost, and then there's the issue of, and then what do you layer on top of that to ensure safety, reliability, security, in times of drought? But it seems that the initial question is, where do we want to be in terms of our base demand? And do we just want to accept that it's 26,000, or, like I said, 120 gallons of water per person per day? Or do we want to use this opportunity to do this assessment to really think more ambitiously about where we want to be for the longer term? Is that resonating with anybody out there?
It resonates with me. I don't sort of conceptualize it the same way. I see some real practical challenges to get there. And I'm glad to go back to an earlier slide about reconfiguring our triggers, because I think one of the problems we had with our most recent drought, which of course we're still in, is I think the trigger was a little late. And I think I'm assuming that the trigger is going to be a higher amount of storage. I think we need to be alerting our residents when we're entering into a supply urgency, if not emergency situation. So I think, it's more of a practical thing, but I think modifying our trigger levels to higher levels so that we give people more notice is really critical. Because everybody knows we can't get there without the cooperation of our customers. And that's been the key to Marin's longevity and its conservation ethic for many years, which seems to be getting lost in the conversation at times. The other thing that is a concern to me is ABAG's RENA numbers for Marin are for 14,000 more units in the next 8 years. And if those units use the same amount of water that our average single family customers are using, that's going to absorb Castania. You're talking 14,000 units. If each of them uses about a third of an acre a year, that's your 4,500, 5,000 acre feet. So,
but we've got options there, right? That's not just a given.
I think we do have options there, and that's kind of what I was leading to is, as far as conservation, I think we really have to look at imposing or regulating water use in new construction, particularly big multi-unit construction projects that are in the pipeline. I understand if a project has more than 100 units, we have to do a water supply analysis. I'm not sure what the trigger is for that, but that's you know, that's
It's a state-
something
yeah.
we really need to be thinking about.
It's a state law
So-
requirement, but that's a floor, not a ceiling.
Yeah, so we have a lot of challenges. The one thing I want to throw in the mix as far as supply, and I've mentioned it to the board and I've talked to staff about it, is doing spillway gates so that we have a flexible way of increasing storage at some of our facilities, maybe at Kent, maybe at Nicasio, maybe at Suluhuli. So if we employed that, which North Marin Water is considering doing at Stafford, that might give us that extra amount of supply, which gets us to a margin of safety for a pretty reasonable price. So I don't know if my thoughts are that coherent at this point, but there's a lot of moving parts that we need to consider, and indeed cost is a big driver.
Yeah, no, I think your thoughts are coherent, and I agree. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'd love to steer this a little bit back to that kind of baseline assumption about our demand. And if we're comfortable as a board just saying, yep, 2,600, that's what we should be shooting for. Again, baseline drought is obviously, and the belt and suspenders approach that Paul outlined, which I support, is on top of that. But there is, I think, this question about, do we simply want to accept that this is for the next 10, 15, 20 years, and that's the right baseline number for this district? Because right now, guys, we're right in the middle. We're dead center. We're not particularly, this is not a conservation number by any means, right? You've all seen the slide that Paul showed. I think it was you, Paul, a while back. We are almost dead center in California. There are districts that are, I don't want to say profligate, but they're using upwards of 250, 300 gallons of water per person per day. There are those that are far better than we are, down around 30 or 40. To me, I always just lop off the extremes. I don't think decisions are best made at the extremes, but in that middle range, I think we need to be having the conversation with ourselves and with the public about whether 120 gallons of water per person per day is truly sustainable and honestly cost effective in light of climate change, right? We're talking about making very significant investments in new supply, which I support. I think those investments are necessary. I think there's a range of options that we're going to talk about, but one way or another, there's going to be at least one, maybe more than one, fairly expensive capital investment in supplemental supply. So the question is, to what end, right? Where do we want to be in terms of our base need? Where do we want to be guiding our internal policies? So is it 120? Is everybody comfortable with that? Or do we think we can do better than smack in the middle of the state?
When we go through this kind of analysis, which obviously will take some time and attention, I think we have to factor into it, and not just the abstract numbers. I think we have to say, what will be the impact on the community when we do that? When we say people have to have X conservation, what do they have to do to get to that? So that we have a clear picture, not only of the numbers we're driving to, but what the impact is on the community that those numbers will mean.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. To me, that's what the assessment's for. That's why I'm suggesting that we, rather than just assume that we're going to be at 120, because the impact, basically, I think we can say is zero, right? 120 is where we are today. That's today. So zero impact, other than we'll get to cost. But so that's part of what I'm interested in, Jack. It's like, if we were to include in the assessment a lower base demand, what would the impact be? We can't know the answer to that unless we ask the question. But I agree, that is the question.
Yes, that is the question.
So right now, it doesn't sound like that's a question that's part of the assessment. The assessment's assuming status quo demand, 26,120 GPCD.
That's the baseline, what we call the
Right.
baseline director color, yeah.
Right,
And then we would measure effects from there.
right. That's my point.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, and we need a baseline, and I think it's a fine baseline. I'm just saying, is that where we want, are we just accepting that? Or do we want them, or do we want the assessment to include a more, you know, I mean, there's plenty
I
of
think
things around California that have a perfectly, high quality of living, there's plenty of plants, plenty of trees. I'm just saying, isn't that a conversation we need to have with the public about whether today's status quo is the quo? Is the status that we want going forward?
So maybe can it be handled in this way where this is like achieving a reduction in per capita demand is like another project. In some respects, it takes, it doesn't just happen, without some effort. Can't that be presented? Can different rates of decreased per capita use be explored as a project, because it would take costs? Maybe it's our lawn rebate program or so on and so forth, so that we could see again that the water supply benefit of reduced consumption as a project, so that we're choosing that if that's a cost-effective solution, and it probably is part of our solution set going forward. We're going to do continued conservation. I don't see us ceasing that, but maybe differing levels that bring us down to lower use rates could be shown as a project cost, so that we could present that and people can see it and it can be weighed in that context. It's a suggestion.
That is exactly what I'm getting at. I'm just concerned that we not just kind of fall into this assumption that this is it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I mean, we've had studies which clearly show conservation is the most cost-effective source of supply.
Right.
But
all over the country, that's the case.
But I go to Jack's question about what's the impact on the community, and that I think goes to the point about changing the trigger points so that we're communicating more effectively with the community. I mean, I agree. I think we've reached a consensus that we need to augment supply on some level, whether it's increasing the efficiency of our relationship with Sonoma, whether it's conservation, any number of things. But if the RENA numbers that are being imposed have anything to do with it, the community's going to have to reduce its per capita consumption. I mean, I think, and I don't know how that's going to play out, really. I mean, and I know we're not in the business of approving planning or that type of thing, but we're right in the middle of it, So I think we've got to at least add that to our variables in our calculation. That if this growth that's being mandated actually comes to fruition, that's going to definitely have an impact on the community, not only just in the construction, but in the use of water. So I think that it's inescapable. Your question, Cynthia, it's inescapable that number is going to have to change. It's going to have to be reduced.
Well, I don't think that conservation should be the driving force. I think we should be looking at what sources of water we have, how much they cost, what is the negative impact to the environment for going that way, and get that into a framework that makes sense and everybody can live with, and then say, okay, to meet that, how does conservation fit into this? What do we have to do to make all this happen within these limits?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's got to be done holistically, and I totally agree with that. And I don't mean to go off on into the weeds on this. It's got to be holistic. It's got to be done in sort of like, it's the uniform field theory. It's all gotta kind of come together. And that's, it's only gonna work if all the different aspects of the strategy are holistically analyzed and accounted for.
Yeah, so it sounds like we all are on somewhat of the same page. I mean, I think, Jack, to your point, you know, the question isn't, I mean, it just seems to me, what are we aiming for is important, right? And I think we need to be intentional about whether the amount of water that we're consuming today is the goal that we should be striving to meet every single year, no matter what. I just think as a policy question, it's worth considering. So I absolutely agree with everything you just said. And I also think that we need to be thinking about that because, look, you know, Paul and I were talking earlier. I mean, the projection when Larry Russell and I started on the board in 2005 was we absolutely were going to be using 36,000 acre feet every year on average. And that was driving at that time certain, you know, proposals that were before the district. And it just turned out to be simply not true. It was just, you know, we were not anywhere close to that. So, and without, I think we can fairly say, without any significant loss of Marin's quality of life in the process. So with very small investment, with very little effort, we are almost a third, using a third or more than a third less than we were projected to be using. So I'm simply saying that given the realities of climate change, given the realities of cost, and frankly, given the changes in technology, right? I mean, we weren't thinking back then about the kinds of online devices, about the kinds of technology that has been developed since then, right? So I want us to be conscious that just because we're using this much water today, that any reduction is going to result in some horrendous change in the quality of life. I'm not confident that that's a fair or reasonable assumption.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think there's been a lot of hyperbole about it, and I think, you know, adaption, we have to adapt. I mean, we're facing rapidly changing conditions that, you know, are going to force us to do that. And, you know, from what I've seen this past year in our conservation efforts and the cooperation and the communication and the demand elasticity that our customers have demonstrated, you know, that we can adapt. And that's not to rule out supply augmentation, because like I said, I think we all agree we need to do that in a holistic way.
So remember I said, beware the simple agendas.
Yeah.
But I know time's getting on. I don't want to cut any of the board members off, but we do have two other questions to move into. And we don't need all of the answers tonight, but I think there's some great discussion points and I think some information staff can bring that maybe will help. For example, how much does it take to move, you know, to the left of that chart where we're slap bang in the middle? And then what would that program look like? And, you know, just some ideas about how much water that is and what are we actually talking about?
Paul, I appreciate your effort to move us forward, but I do want to see if maybe you got some direction there from that discussion too, though, that I think is important, which is about how to, I think, but I heard some consensus around is that we want to look at conservation like a project, and that we see it as a range, knowing that you just don't get it. It actually will take effort to get there, but that's just like another project. Is that
an investment? It's not free.
It's an investment. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. There'll be, I think, levels of investment that we need to talk about as we move on, just so you have an idea of what that range looks like. I think we have some good direction. So this was a tough one. So I think great job getting through this one tonight. We could go on a while, I'm sure. But just jumping to this other one, which is kind of an important one that we're all going to face, which is how are we going to make these decisions, right? With this limited data and kind of questionable confidence in the historical record. And again, this is really what the premise of the water supply assessment is designed. The process that we're using is really designed to try to take this into account. And this is the sort of theory of this cone of uncertainty, where we can't really predict what the exact future state is going to be, but we can kind of come up with a range of plausible future states. And then we can try to look for robust solutions that work for all of those states. And of course, right, thinking cost, that's likely to be an expensive, potentially, but maybe there is a solution that works. Castagna comes to mind, right? That's a great solution. And then we would look and see, does that work for all conditions? And then, okay, there are these concepts called contingent solution that work for some smaller subset, because maybe robust solutions are just, they're too big to really consider all those range of future plausible states. So I'll stop talking there. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about this one.
I think more than too big, Paul, it's likely to be too many unknowns.
Mm.
I don't see the size of the project or that kind of thing being the shocking revelation here. What I see is you hit where you have to make judgment calls, and there's no real data to make the judgment call on. That's the sticky part I see coming.
Yeah. Maybe in our planning process, we need trigger points for consideration of other options, depending on the length of the climate change.
Right.
So right now, assuming if we project a climate or temperature at a certain level, this is where we go. If things really change, then, we have another trigger point to go to plan B, so to speak.
Right. And that's exactly what you're kind of seeing, is these disruptive and decision point arrows in the cone of uncertainty there, exactly what you're describing, where you can kind of pivot. Oh, no, we need a bigger recycled water facility. Oh, no, maybe we can get away with a smaller one. As the information, as we go along in time, some of those unknowns become known. Let's not go there. I was just gonna say, I'm starting to sound like an old Secretary of Defense that we may all.
You don't want to sound like that.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and
no.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Paul, isn't it fair to say that this piece is not resolvable? I'm really grateful that you raised this, but I think what we need to embrace is this uncertainty. And it seems to me that the level of uncertainty, just to back up, climate change is fairly certain. The impacts of climate change are what's uncertain, other than more likely more extremes in both directions, more intense, flooding, more intense, more severe drought. That's everything I'm seeing, especially from the recent IPCC report. It's just confirming everything that we've been hearing for the last, decade or so. So it seems to me that what this really leads to is that we need more options, right? We don't want to be putting all of our resources into one basket. What this says, to use your term, is that we need a lot of redundancy, right? The fact of uncertainty, the fact that past is no longer prologue, it suggests that I know a lot of people, I should say, are yearning for that silver bullet that's just going to make everything better forever. And it seems that the more prudent approach is to have redundancies that provide us with many, many options, as opposed to putting all of our eggs in a single basket. Is that a fair way to describe how, a sort of prudent approach to this level of uncertainty?
Yeah, I would see your redundant and raise you a portfolio.
Fair enough.
Right.
I'll meet you.
Yeah. Right. It's exactly. I think you're right on.
And in terms of that, Paul, I think what we should start shaping our thinking to is kind of a mutual fund approach, where you can have some investments with lower risk and reasonable return, others with higher risk with better return. And instead of betting on one or the other, you come up with a group. And I think that's a portfolio, exactly, Cynthia. But do it in the form of, where do we need to get to and how are we going to get there? And so rather than, spotting the silver bullet, all you got to do is make sure that the silver bullet's inside of the envelope. And you don't have to hit it right on the head with a perfect project. You just got to get the average. addressed,
Well,
like
yeah.
a mutual fund does.
Yeah, I love the
What are your
mutual
goals?
fund. I love the mutual fund analogy. I think that's great. I think having those, but I'm going to urge us all to move away from silver bullets entirely. There is no silver bullet here. I think we should just embrace that. What we have, to paraphrase and plagiarize from Felicia Marcus, is silver buckshot, right? The more options we have, the better. I mean, that's
Well put.
Okay. Last call on this one. No takers. Okay, great. We're gonna make 9 o'clock. Let's see if that's true. No, yeah, we got lots of time. But it's a little bit, you guys have been reading ahead somehow in the script with this whole portfolio and redundancy stuff. That will be part of April 26th as well. I think some previews into that. Okay, this is the last discussion question. So I think everybody understands this one, right? It takes time to develop projects. What are we going to do? How are we going to think about managing the potential droughts in the short term? And so we've jotted down as a team thoughts on what we would do. And of course, as part of the project, timing to provide a benefit would be important to us as well, right? And then, what can we do with demand management? We sort of saw some effects from our efforts last year. How can we improve upon those and really ramp them up? Emergency projects, we've obviously had some experience in getting those going. And then we also sought exceptions to regulatory processes particularly around stream releases. And then we optimize our operations, right? Taking as much as we can from Castania, taking winter water when it's available, and maximizing Phoenix when possible. So those were just some thoughts that we jotted down, and happy to hear if you guys have anything else you think we may have missed on this one.
I think you've covered it, and if this is too far out of line, but what is, do we have any plans to have a transmission line from North Marin, say to Sulahuli or to Nicasio? Is that being considered?
We're gonna, there's a we're gonna look at a line right from our turnout near the North Marin turnout and see what it would take to move that water into Nicasio. We're also going to be looking at a dedicated conveyance from somewhere up near Katati to Nicasio. And that those will just be some concepts that we want to run to ground, and put some numbers to. Yeah.
And then I assume part of that would be to bring electricity to electrify Nicasio.
So Sulahuli is,
or rather Sulahuli. I'm
yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're gonna use Sulahuli more regularly, we would absolutely need to have the pumps hooked up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Before I get the hook sign anymore, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So our schedule as we're going forward. So tonight we had a kind of brief preview on the goals and discussion. April 26th, deep dive into the goals and process, including some scenarios. And of course, given how fast the project's moving and just kind of a lot of information that we want to convey, a lot of concepts that we need to kick around just from the 3 questions tonight even, it's sort of a proposal for the board to think about, subject to your interest. We could consider those sort of off Tuesdays as placeholder meetings for the water supply assessment. So I just throw that out there, and just note for members of the public still listening, the next workshop we're thinking is in May. This is public workshop. Of course, these board meetings and the April 26th meeting is also a public meeting that they can attend. And then the third one we have penciled in for June.
I think those are good suggestions, Paul. One of the things that's concerned me about the goals for setting the GPCD is how to assess the public's input, because I don't know how to do that just yet. And I mean, not just the squeaky wheels, but to get a comprehensive evaluation of where the community's at in terms of what do they see as the goals for Marin in terms of water usage, grass, no grass, whatever.
Mhm.
And I like I say, maybe there's a way to do it with a poll or a vote of some kind. I'm really not sure how to solicit a broad input.
Well, we can, take that offline with Adrian and come back with some thoughts to share.
Sure.
So Larry, I really agree with you. I think we really do want to get a broad cross-section of the public being involved. My hesitance is that you can ask people questions in the abstract with a poll or even a focus group, and you're going to get a very skewed answer if you don't include things like, and it's going to cost you this much, right? I think you need a lot more information.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I just think, I think, so on the one hand, absolutely, we need to hear from the public, because I think we don't have one voice in the public. I mean, I'm certainly hearing many, many different voices. I hear plenty of people saying, the amount of water we're using is crazy. I have other people saying, my God, we need more water. So I think we are a community that has a wide diversity of views. I don't think there is a public view. I think there are many, many, many public views. That said, I think the public, I think it's hard for the public to weigh in meaningfully if you don't tell them, and this is how it's going to affect your rates. And it's going to affect your rates year in, year out for many, 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 many years to come, which is the reality for many of the suggestions that are being floated in the public right now.
And of course, that falls out of the Jacobs report. So, maybe we just need to get through that.
I'm just saying, we're not going to have that before we make these decisions, right? When you say that falls out of the report, that's at the end of the report. That's not in the middle of it.
That's correct. Yeah,
right? We're not going to have that for the May public workshop or the June public workshop.
Yeah, but we don't have to close the loop in May or in June. We have to close it soon, but not, I don't see a hard deadline,
right,
of July 1st or else.
Right. And I'm also saying, I think we need to account for the reality, and I think it is a reality, that there isn't a public view. There are many, we're going to get a lot. There are going to be plenty of people who have views who don't show up, and there are going to be plenty of people who have views that do show up. But I think we need to be clear with ourselves that we are a diverse, engaged, educated community that are going to have a wide variety of views.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Making it even harder to assess.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think I remember Dana Roxon presenting a water supply report where he went back to 1917 and they were talking about Alpine Dam, and 49% of the people were against it and 51 for it. And then here we were 100 years later almost, and it was almost the same sort of split talking about water supply options.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Anyway, we're going to wrap with a quick summary. So we our goals and targets, we're going to hit those in April. Alternatives development in May and June, and maybe at that time we'll have some cost numbers. So it may be possible in June that we may have some preliminary cost numbers we can share, and then the roadmap sort of July. Just wrapping on the water supply update, the storage projections, we're going to end the water year right around average with even no additional rain. And on the 15th, the next ops committee will be continuing our discussion and consideration of shifting from emergency actions to sort of our enhanced normal year demand management program. Do you remember those half dozen or so items that Carrie was thinking about? And of course, our messaging to our customers is that we do need to continue to use water wisely in the short term, and acknowledging that we have this long-term need for water supply resiliency, and we're working on that at the moment. That concludes the presentation for this evening. And, thank you guys very much for, I think, a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you too, Paul.
Going forward, I think an item like this probably would have been better in the doc meeting than in the board meeting, just FYI. I think it's more of a doc kind of subject. So kind of keep that in mind where we put these items, Ben. Okay, public comment?
Yes, we have several. So let me switch over here. The first public speaker I have is Roger Roberts, then Larry Minikes. Mr. Roger Roberts, I've enabled you to your microphone permissions. Go ahead and speak.
Need to reset the clock, Terry.
Yeah, that's when he starts speaking and when I can hear him.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
Cynthia is spot on in terms of overlaying this analysis with what this means in terms of per capita consumption. In Southern California, their experience has been with increased population, they're now using less water per capita than they did years ago. And that sort of is the kind of goal we want to pursue here now. And so I think it's important as you look at these options and including conservation, you need to keep in mind what this means in terms of per capita consumption. And there's a second very good financial reason for doing that, because per capita consumption is water sales. And what does that mean for rates? And that is a fallout from incorporating per capita use in terms of financial planning for the district. And so thank you, Cynthia, for raising this issue. It has deep and serious impacts in terms of your financial planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minikes, please. I have enabled your microphone permissions.
Yes, thank you. Paul, you weren't kidding. This was a wolf in sheep's clothing tonight, and very, very helpful. Really appreciate all the information. A lot to think about. I want to add this: when talking about conservation, what we can do, AMI should be coming into that conversation, and what that will do on its own to help reduce water use. That's one piece of it. I also want to say, if you want to get people to a number, I remember the same chart that Director Kohler was referring to, where we're kind of in the middle. Let's make a goal. It can be a 5-year goal that we get down by 2027, we get down to the lower 27%, or by 2030, 8 years, we're in the lower 30%. But make a goal so that people understand where we're trying to go and why we're trying to go there, and that it makes sense in everyone, in people that don't pay attention to this every day. Oh yeah, we should be in the lower 25% of all users. You know, that's the right place to be. And I think that's how you can get there. Along with the actions that were mentioned, rate increases have to be part of that. And that was brought up toward the end, and I had written that much earlier. Of the actions, because we're seeing with gasoline right now, there's a lower consumption because price is driving that. People are definitely driving less. I also want to, Director Russell, President Russell made an early comment about the Castagna. It equals the 2010 savings of what desal would have provided, but what would that cost have been? And if I understand correctly, we can get to 6,800 acre feet total, reading from that chart on page 7. Also, it was listed that there's this is greater than Bontempi at 4,019 acre feet, but I didn't understand if that's the total capacity of Bontempi or the usable amount. And then to costs. Here's where it said the cost of the supplemental water is $1,257 per acre feet. So my question is, what is our cost, our actual cost per acre foot, so that we have that? And then as you're going forward, desal, pulling water over the intertie, all these other options, what is the acre foot going to cost? And then what is the ratepayer at the end of the day going to have to pay? And that is coming exactly to what Director Kohler was heading. And that's where I was heading in my comments, to the same place, is at the end of the day, the ratepayer has to know where we're going to be with this, so that they understand what the best option is going to be for us. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Larry, a quick answer to your questions. San Diego is currently paying $2,750 per acre foot for the desalinated water. It's resulted in a doubling of the San Diego water bills. And I was just in a meeting in San Diego today talking about exactly the subject. It's a very touchy subject, needless to say. And the other question you had is about, as I recall, Paul, about $1,000 an acre foot is what we for our own water, maybe a little less, 700 to 1,000.
Yeah, it's I think the average cost of our water is around 600 or 700. Yeah. Yeah.
We have two more speakers, Mr. Ed Jamison, then James Krajewski. Mr. Jamison, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm a user who went through an absolutely terrifying experience last fall. Until those October rains arrived, I could see us running out of water this July, except for the reduced amount we were going to get from Sonoma. That's an unacceptable approach to this board's planning. Let me just give you a couple big picture numbers, just two of them. This is the reality. In 2011, we used 26,000 acre feet. In 2020, we used 27,000 acre feet. It varies by year depending upon rain and a lot of other things, but the big picture is we accomplished very little conservation savings over those 9 or 10 years, other than what absorbed the population increase, which was not dramatic. Any thoughts that we saved 40% last year are misinformed. We peaked at 23% last summer. We need to give up those thoughts. We need to have reliable sources of water. This reliance upon conservation is a backup and a helpful measure, but it cannot be counted on. Our flume users, we were the lowest of 17 counties. We were shown last September. Our district says we only use 40 gallons a day indoors. And they showed a slide to the November 9th East Bay Mud planning meeting that showed our outdoor usage is half or less than half of the California average. So we have done the job over the last 4.5 decades on conservation. We've accomplished very little since 2011 because I think we're really wrung out on conservation. We need additional supply. And lastly, this board must not interfere with the work of this division staff and Jacobs to lay out alternatives. Let conservation be part of the plan. Do not try to interrupt the development of other alternatives, and let it be evaluated at the end of the process. Let the process run. Let it be open and honest for us users. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. James Krajewski, I've enabled your microphone permissions. Please feel free to speak.
Thank you. This discussion is very interesting because some of it we don't hear much about, but mostly it seems to me that the water district over the last years has lost its focus on a primary role of being a supplier of water. Instead, it's largely been a conservation district. And I think we need to figure out what it is that the people of Marin want. And deciding how much water we want involves a vision of what water use in Marin should look like. And that means we need a vision of what Marin should look like. Missing in many of these discussions of conservation is what's the end point of conservation? How much conservation is enough? It's never enough. It's always going to take care of this or it's going to take care of something else. And we should be using 2 gallons of water a day or something. I don't know what the end point is. And in that discussion, we also need to know, what is Marin going to look like in practical terms? If we're going to cut back on water, does that mean we get rid of this or that? Do we get rid of fruit trees out in the yard? Do we get rid of, take a shower twice a week? What are the practical implications of all of this? So I would agree with the prior speaker that basically said, what do Marin residents want? We've been many of us at least, have been conserving for years since the past droughts. And we need very practical guidance of this is what it's going to look like if you cut back further and further and further. And this is what it's going to cost. So what are the cost of various degrees of conservation in money and quality of life in our environment? And these are all answers that we need that come from the water district rather than just, oh, let's conserve more. We don't conserve enough and we don't have enough water. It should be a water supplier, not just a conservation district and a micromanagement district. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Let me assure you guys that we have no intention to interfere with any progress of the Jacobs report. It is done by an outside consultant for a reason. We're going to get the results and then evaluate them. We do have input along the way, and we have to make that input. But it is, our goal is to come to a good engineering solution to the long-term water needs of this district. Okay. The last item on our agenda, and thank the public for their comments, is future meeting agenda.
Yes, good evening. Directors, please note that we have our Operations Committee meeting on Friday, April 15th. We'll have our other Board of Directors regular bi-monthly meeting on April 19th. And then again, our special meeting on the Strategic Water Supply Assessment Working Session meeting on Tuesday, April 26th at 5 p.m. I know that I had sent an email that it will maybe be between 5 and 7, but I think it's my understanding that it may be a little bit afterwards. So hopefully you're able to spend a little bit more time past 7. And then also, as you know, we'll have our North Bay Watershed Association virtual conference this Friday. And that's it. That's all. I have.
Terry, if I could
Sure.
briefly jump in. The Paul teed up the concept of the off Tuesdays to have penciled in through this water supply assessment. So we have some certainty on scheduling. We certainly are going to have a lot of these deeper discussions than we had tonight as we start getting into this. So we would like ideally to have some regularly scheduled meetings dedicated to this effort. So I'm just interested in feedback from the board. We can continue some of it offline with Terry coordinating, but generally that would give us 2 dedicated meetings every month, in addition to the ops committee, where we could also talk about kind of residual items or teeing items up for the next scheduled dedicated meeting. So I don't know if there was board feedback on that concept.
I think it's a good concept.
I do too.
Yeah, I think it gives us more chance to see the progress, gives us more chance to kind of keep up with your progress. So,
and guys, I live and breathe this water business, but I get stretched out when these meetings go on for hours. It's hard. It's much easier to do it in bite-sized pieces and keep reiterating issues and reiterating them and bringing them to a head, rather than try to do these giant meetings where there's a whole lot of balls being juggled all the time.
yeah, I think it would improve our process. So I'm all for it.
And increase public input.
Yeah.
So we'll not hearing any opposition to starting in May. We would schedule, in fact, the 26th happens to be on a Tuesday as well. So we would follow that with the 2nd and 4th at a similar time, perhaps as the 26th, for water supply assessment meetings. And we would try and keep that to a 2-hour schedule, if that works conceptually with the board.
Your question tonight was dedicated meeting, is that?
Yes, that's correct. We'd like to do dedicated meetings on this water supply assessment. Obviously, we're going to be continuing the deeper discussions along the lines we had tonight, but we're also going to be moving into, in parallel as we're doing that, talking about the different project alternatives and what we're finding and the scope of those, and of course, the costs. And as we get into that, and ultimately, look at developing the portfolio with a roadmap. But it will take a significant amount, of course, of board and public engagement, and having those meetings pre-scheduled in a time and dates that we all know ahead of time for our own personal schedules, for your schedules, I think would be ideal. So I'm looking for generally consensus for starting in May, the second and fourth Tuesday, and that would flow into June and July as well. If not,
Well, I don't know we really need consensus, Ben. I think what we need to do is to schedule the meetings. Them who can make it, make it. Them who can't can watch them on video. They're all recorded. And I think it's better to get something set up and just do our best. If we try to bring consensus on every meeting that everyone's available, then, we're going to have the camel is the horse designed by committee. We do our best and schedule a meeting and have at it and see where we are. Like I said, if you can make it, you can make it. If you can't make it, catch it on video.
If I may, I just wanted to let the general manager know that the second and third Tuesdays of May are already scheduled, because the first Tuesday of May is for the, I believe,
Board meeting.
the conferences, ACWA conference. Yeah. So
okay,
we'll figure it out.
We'll work around that one hiccup in May. But we'll do our best to be scheduling water supply meetings, water supply assessment, basically on this project, the second and fourth Tuesday at the same time that we have the meeting on the 26th from 5 to approximately 7.
And I would just say, I don't know how many people are going to Aqua, but I think we should consider having a meeting that day. I'm not making it this year. So to Larry Russell's point, I mean, it has rarely been the case that a majority of the board goes to Aqua. So.
Yeah,
Exactly. And
actually,
it's a meeting after the conference ends for the day. So
Yeah.
it's like, it might interfere with socializing, but we'll just have to, this is obviously a critical program
I
in
think
our.
that's a really good
agenda.
point. What we could do in May is move our board meeting to the regular schedule Tuesday, and then we'll have the pattern. So we'll have the board meetings on the 1st and 3rd. And then you do the 2nd and 4th Tuesday in April for the water supply assessment. I think Director Kohler, that's a good point, because I don't know if any board meetings or board members are necessarily going to this one, nor staff that wouldn't be able to make this meeting anyway.
And even if they go, Ben, with the
Absolutely.
hybrid program, you can zoom in, right? From wherever
Absolutely.
you are.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll proceed with that direction. Thank you for that.
Perfect. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a very useful viewpoint. Okay. With that, I think we are adjourned.
Actually, we do have a closed session item tonight.
I know that. I know. We still have to
okay.
adjourn the public, or we don't adjourn the public.
We would
But
want.
we have to
see
open it
the-
again, right?
Right. We'll have a separate Zoom for the board to participate in the closed session. This Zoom will remain open. We'll re-adjourn at the end. And then prior to our closed session, we will allow for any public comment if there is any on the closed session item.
Okay, then I'm not sure what to say at this point. We're going to stop talking about the agenda items.
We'll just ask the board secretary if we have any public comment on the closed session.
We do not. We do not have any public comment on the closed session.
Okay, then I think we're ready to convene to the closed session.
So we have to close. We'll be closed out of this Zoom. So whether it stays open or not, doesn't matter to us, because
separate
we
Zoom.
can only be on one Zoom at a time.
Exactly.
Right. And please note,
Okay.
check your email, 8 o'clock tonight. I re-forwarded, or I forwarded to you again, the Zoom link for the closed session.
Thank you.
I'm recording. There you go.
Now we're good. Okay.
Perfect.
The closed session ended at 9:37 and staff was given direction.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay,
And
Molly?
Yep, ready to adjourn.
Okay, and the meeting is adjourned.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.